Hey there, guys. Welcome to the March 32nd live coding session. We've got a big shift today. We're going to go into learning variables, which is a huge new concept to learn. So for that, we're going to be using this app called Learning Variables that I wrote for the Code Hub. You can go to the store and download that. We'll walk you through that in just a second. But first, to introduce you to the learning variables concept, variables are basically like a holder for information that we might use when we're programming. You might think of it like a box. Like I've got this one labeled pens. Now the box itself isn't pens, but I have my pens inside it. You have another box here that holds something else. This one says leopard on it. Hope to God it's not an actual leopard. But just like with our functions, with our commands, we can call things different things. They don't have to match what they actually are. It helps if they do. If I hand this box to somebody that says pens on it, they'll know that, oh yeah, cool, that's where he's kept the pens. Leopard might not be as useful. So we're going to get into the syntax for that in a bit. But what I want you to do first is we're going to go back to the iPad. We're going to go to the App Store and download Learning Variables to talk about the concept of variables. All right, so we're on the iPad now. We're going to go off to the App Store. If you haven't already, I have it already downloaded here, Learning Variables. But if you don't have it downloaded already, we go off to the App Store. We go to the search tab at the bottom here, and we search for Learning Variables. And we see this is one of our first results. I already have it, so you can just hit the get button if you don't have it already. So I'm going to open it. It's free on both the Mac, iPads. It'll also run on a phone, but it won't look quite as good. All right, so while we're waiting for this app to download, if you don't quite have this ready, what I want to do is a quick review of syntax. We talked about syntax the last couple of weeks. Basically, that's just the way of formatting your code so that the computer will understand it. And Swift has a particular syntax. We've learned about for loops, and we've learned about functions. For loops are going to have that for starting things off every single time. We have a placeholder there. In yesterday's lessons, we were using the letter I, which is common enough. It's followed by the keyword in, which is always in every for loop. Then we have the starting number. Any of these things in gray here are going to be things that we can change. So this starting number, typically we start at 1 when we're starting our loop. We'll see other cases further down the road in other sessions where we might make that a different number or might use something else to trigger our loop. We have the 3 dots that are going to be the same, and then we have our end number. So if we want to loop something 4 times, we would have 1 ... 4. And then inside these curly braces, we'll have our code that we want to be repeated that many times. So yesterday when we were getting Byte to move forward and collect gems and then turn around and come back, all of the code to perform the thing that would be done over and over again was done inside this block in where we say code to be repeated here. And then for functions, we have our keyword func to start it all off. We give our function a descriptive name, typically a verb. So it's kind of an action type of name, like toggle and go, or move and toggle, move and collect. And we lowercase the first letter in our function name, and then every other first letter of the word after that is capitalized, and there are no spaces. And then inside the curly braces, so after the function name, we have our parentheses, then we have our curly braces, and then inside the curly braces, we have our code for the function here. So whatever code we want to be able to call by just referring to that function, we would put in there. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully by now we have our Learning Variables app downloaded. So if you want to go ahead and launch that, it's a pretty simple app. There's nothing too crazy about it. What we'll do, since this is our first time using the app, we're going to tap on the very first story down here. Down here we have our stories. We have a big plus button that we'll look at in just a second. But first we'll tap on the very first story. And what we can see here is we have a new syntax. So for variables, we have this purple keyword var that we start off with. We have our variable name here, adjective1, and then we have an equal sign. Down here we have var adjective2 equals var noun 1, var noun 2, verb 1. And then inside here in the hints for our text fields, it gives you a hint about what we're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for an adjective. So let's use yellow. You can use whatever you like. Adjective 2 is going to be a number. Maybe let's use 7. We're looking for a noun. How about goose? A plural noun. How about houses? And then we need a past tense verb. So how about swam? Okay, so when you tap inside each of these text fields, the keyboard will come up and you'll be able to enter in your entry there. Now there's a show story button up at the top, and I'm going to tap on that. And basically what I have now is I have my story, and I can see these are my variables here, the things that are underlined, and they tell me which variable is in that field. So I swam, that was my past tense verb, you remember that I entered in. This is my first adjective I entered, so I swam across the yellow goose, 7 houses. That maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. But I can go back using this navigation item here, and I can say, well, maybe I could try to make that make a bit more sense. Maybe not, maybe I could make it a bit goofier. Instead of houses, I could just say mice. I can change 7. I can even change this. It doesn't really enforce that this is an adjective or a number. I could say, I don't know, I could say burp and then hit show story. And you can see that swam stayed the same because I didn't change that. Yellow stayed the same because I didn't change that. Goose stayed the same because I didn't change noun 1. But I changed the values for adjective 2 and for noun 2. So my plural noun I changed to mice from houses, and adjective 2 was supposed to be a number, but I decided to write the word burp in there, which I'm sure if you're a teacher and you're running this in your class, I guarantee you're going to get burp and all sorts of other words in there. So this is supposed to show you kind of how variables work. And if you tap on each one of so if I tap on swam, the variable that value is coming from shows up over the text. So then the handy thing is, then I could use, in my story here, I could wind up using adjective 1 in a couple places, and it would show up yellow every single time it was referenced. So if we go back to the beginning, there are some other stories that you can fill in. And kind of shows you, okay, so we have a proper noun. So like the Code Hub. Adjective would be maybe fast. Noun 2 would be, let's say, cheese. Pronoun would be she. Verb ending in ing, running. Verb past tense, jumped. This is a very active story. And then verb 3 will have, I don't know, wrote. All right, so we'll go up and hit show story. Late one fast night, the Code Hub was out running when suddenly she stopped and jumped. A cheese had wrote right in the way. Okay, so this is just a bit of fun, right? We're also kind of seeing that our noun 1 that we filled in, our proper noun, is here. It's the Code Hub, so the value of noun 1 is being substituted into our text. If I go back and I pick a story like, say, a surprising visitor, and I hit show story without filling in any of my values, we'll now see the story with all the variables, but none of them have been populated. So we've got all the variables in parentheses here. So it kind of shows you what the story looks like when it's kind of empty. So if I go back and I fill in maybe just noun 1 with sun, I'll see that, okay, cool, I've got one variable assigned a value. When we see that equal sign when we're programming, we call it assigning a value. So just like the syntax that we saw for for loops or functions, if I say var noun 1 equals sun, I'm saying, hey, listen, whenever I tell you to use the value from noun 1, it's been assigned sun. So wherever we see it in the story or in our program, that's the value that you're going to use. Now, there are a couple nice features here inside learning variables. If you're using it in the classroom, you can hit show story. There's a little share button at the top. Now we can either share the text or we can save the images from this particular story. Now, this isn't a great one. I don't think I'd save this one. But you can share it with your classmates by emailing it around. You can also create your own stories to get a feel for variables. If you hit the plus button here, we'll get a little entry field here where we can give it a title. My coding story. I don't need to give it a description, that's optional. Let's write a really quick story. On a Wednesday, okay, and then not an amazing story, but if I hit the create story button, I'll now see that my stories show up with a white background and a blue border. So if I tap on this, I can actually hand this off to a friend and they can go and play around with the story a little bit. So let's see, adjective 1 is, let's see, well, let's go with an old standby, yellow, and then a verb, wave. Okay, so we'll go hit show story. Was live coding on a Wednesday. It was yellow. I wave a little cloudy out. So when you write your own story, the app will try to be a little bit smart and pick out random words, try to figure out what part of speech it is, and generate some variables so that your classmates or your friends can go fill in values for those variables, and then it'll substitute the stories. This looks a little bit like a very popular sort of notebook game that we used to have in the States. I won't use the name for legal reasons, but it's just a nice way to get the class interacting. It's a really fun thing to share. It's nice to create your own story and then hand your iPad over to the next person next to you and see if they can come up with a kind of wacky twist to your particular story. Okay, so that was an intro to variables. Hopefully that helps a little bit. We'll be seeing this syntax a little bit more when we get into our next playground. So if we go back to the home screen, we're going to open up books again. And everyone can code puzzles if it's not open already. So we're on chapter 4. And we can see blue here. And it'll tell us a little bit about variables, and it'll give us a little bit more information about variables. It has a couple words, key vocabulary here, like double and string. We'll get into what those are in a little bit, but for now we won't worry about those. So they give the example here of a card, and for example, a person like yourself. You have a few variables that can be attached to you, right? A few properties. A name property, an age property, a phone number property. And we have a kind of interesting activity here that you can try out on your own. What we're going to do now is we are going to jump to Learn to Code 2 in Swift Playgrounds, and we're going to try out these first two pages here, introduction and keeping track. So let's hop out of books for a second, and we're going to open up Swift Playgrounds. Now I've already downloaded it here. Let me go grab another copy just in case. So we go off to more. So what I did here is I launched Swift Playgrounds. I hit see all. And up here I have Learn to Code 2. We're right at the very top of the page. We have Learn to Code 1, 2, and Blues Adventure are kind of key parts of the whole Swift Playgrounds experience. So we're going to hit get. And while we're waiting for that to download, you might also want to get the Answers Playground. So that's in here. If you hit see all, there is a starting points section down here. So if we drag over to the left, we're going to get the Answers Playground. Now the Chapter 4 in the book will also ask you to get the Spirals Playground. I think it's definitely worthwhile. We're not going to go through it today. Maybe we'll cover that a little bit more tomorrow. All right, so hopefully your Learn to Code 2 is coming down. We've got like a quarter of the way to go. In other news, to go back over the for loop stuff, I did post a video on the kids.code playlist on YouTube where I went through the Turtle Graphics Playground a little bit more, showed off some ways of doing loops and of drawing different shapes with those loops. That kind of behaves a little bit like the Spirals Playground. So you might want to go have a watch of that and try to have a play around with Turtle Graphics. All right, so we've got our Learn to Code 2 Playground downloaded, so I'm going to open that one up. And it starts us out again with an introduction. And it's going to tell us a little bit about variables. Right, so it talks about our contacts list, all the names that we have there. Encoders, which we all are now. We're storing information in these containers called variables, right? So it's just like the boxes. So this will show off the syntax here. So we use that var keyword, then the name of our variable. And again, just like functions, we want to name this something memorable so that we know what is in that, what the value should be. Usually it's a noun, person, place, or thing. Like in this case, name, age. And then we have this equal sign that assigns this Chris to that name. Now, this explains a little bit about strings and ints. If you're not familiar with those, a string is basically just text. And the way we create a string is with these quotation marks here, these double quotation marks. And then for age, it's a number. So we don't need, it's going to be any digits in this case. No quotes. Because the second we put quotes around it, Swift will say, this is a string. I know that. We'll get into sort of types of variables in a little bit. So as you can see here, and this is going to be important for the next playground, we can actually use these variables. Now, if you've done a bit of algebra or pre-algebra, you might say, oh yeah, okay, cool, I get what variables are. And if you haven't, no big deal. But when you get to algebra and pre-algebra, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know variables. I've done that in coding already. So you'll be well ahead of the game. So in this case, since it's a variable, it means that it can change. We have our age is 19, and because we all get older, the age goes up to 20 here. We can also do math operations on our ints. Int just stands for integer, which is a type of number, a whole number. We can add 1 to it. We can multiply by 2. That's what this little asterisk does. We can divide, as you can see down here. You can divide, which is the slash, and subtract as well. So this is just kind of showing you some of the error messages we might see. We might see a little red dot that says cannot assign a value of type string to type int. This is where we can kind of, this will help you out down the road. So that's a little bit cryptic, but we now understand that, okay, well, there are these things that are strings, there are these things that are ints. In this case, we said that our age when we first set it up was 19, the number. We can't then say, okay, cool, I'm going to spell it out as 21. This is going to be important because Swift cares a lot about this kind of thing, and it's all in the interest of making the language a bit safer for us to use as programmers so that we don't have as many mistakes down the road. In other languages, you might be able to do age equals 19, and then I'm going to spell it out the next time. Well, it's not going to understand how to do math on 20-1. So this kind of helps us out. In this case, you could see the way to fix that particular bug, the particular error that we just saw. So if we hit start coding, we're going to go into the very first playground page for Learn to Code 2. So our goal here is to just create a variable to track the number of gems collected. So they've already actually set up most of it for us. So we want to start out with 0, as it says right here. It says set the initial value of gem counter to 0. So we'll set it to 0. Now we want to move to the gem to pick it up. So we have to solve the puzzle because we're going to use variables. We're not just going to enter in these values and then forget about them. So let's move forward. We'll scroll over here down in the autocomplete bar. Move forward. Scroll over again. Move forward. And then we're going to collect the gem. Now, once we've collected the gem, we're going to set the value of the gem counter to 1. So what we'll do is we'll down here in the autocomplete bar, we'll tap on gem counter, and then some other options come up here. You can see there's an error because I haven't finished this line yet. It says expression resolves to an unused variable. Well, I'm not doing anything with it yet, so it's complaining about it. But down here in the autocomplete bar, I've got an equal sign. So let me tap on that. And then the very next thing that happens is the keyboard pops up and I have a placeholder there telling me that I need an int. So let's give it a number, so 1. Now, this is where the gem counter variable is showing up. Right now it's 0. So let's run my code. Hopper hops up the step, takes a step forward, and then collects the gem. Perfect. We just declared our first variable. We can see that this updated to 1/1 because we incremented by 1. Now there's another way we could do this, right? We can do math on this on these things. So what we could do is we could say, hey, let's get kind of clever and use our variable to up our gem counter. So what we could do is we could say, actually, so I want to take the value that's in gem counter, which is 0 at this stage, and I want to add 1 to it because I've just collected 1 gem. But maybe I've already collected other gems. So I want, if somebody changed the gem counter here and we collected other gems elsewhere, I want to just add 1 to the amount that we have captured in gem counter. So I'm going to go down here and bring up the keyboard. I'm going to go down to the ABC button. I'm going to tap that, and I'm going to tap the I'm going to set it up so I have the numbers at the top. And what I'm going to do is there's the plus button down here. So I'm just going to do plus, and then I'm going to tap 1. So if we run our code, we'll see that that gets reset back to 0 before we've collected the gem. Up the steps we go, forward, collect the gem. And same thing, the same thing happened. We accomplished the same task, except maybe this is a little bit more reusable, this code, where we just added one to the value that was already in gem counter. All right, so this is learn to code 2. So what we're going to do now is close this. We've sort of accomplished our task for chapter 4. So let's close this for a second. And let's go over to another example of variables. So we downloaded that answers playground while we were waiting for learn to code 2 to download. So let's tap on that. And we're just going to stick with the text page for now. We can go up here and look at other pages like types, but we're just going to stick with text. So this one is another fun one, a little bit like learning variables, the app. I like to write out a few lines of code here and then hand it to a friend and have them write the answers in for me. So we have a couple of different commands. We have one that's called show, and then inside the parentheses, which is something new, we have a string. So remember, a string is inside these double quotes, and the string says, what is your name? So this is the question that we want to ask. And then here we have a variable. So instead of using var, we use this other keyword called let. So let and var are two different keywords that we can use for variables. So in fact, just to keep things consistent, we're going to get rid of that. I could type var there instead of let. And so you say var name equals, and then we have this function called ask. And then inside the parentheses, we have another string that says name. And then at the end, we call show again. And we say hi plus name. So we have this part in here. This is a string all on its own with the starting quote and the closing one. And then we add this other string to that first string. So let's try running it and see what we mean here. So when we run this, the show command gets run first, and that says, what is your name? When we say var name equals, this ask function will draw this little text box, and you can see that name is written in there. So if I tap inside the text box, I can say Matt. Now there's a submit button on the side, so when I hit submit, it's going to jump down to the next line of code to run. And it added the two together. So hopefully you can see that this is really powerful. Now we can start to interact with our users a little bit. We can give them a playground with a bunch of questions on it, have them fill in the answers, and then we can use those answers somehow. We can either display them back and address them by their name. If they say, if we ask, how are you feeling? And they say, not great, we can react to that. So here, let's add another variable. So we have our show hi name. So let's see, we're gonna show something else. Let's ask another question. So let's scroll way over to the side and say show, and you'll see this is the autocomplete that we want because it's asking for a string. So we'll say show string. And now the way to get a string is either you can go to the keyboard and bring up the keyboard. And if I hit the numbers, there's my quotes. So let me hit the quotes. And I can say, let's see, do you love coding? If I want to do a question mark and I'm kind of lazy, I can just tap on the button and then drag down. Same thing with quotation marks, because I can see the quotation mark there. If I tap on the L and drag down, I can finish my string. So a string needs both those quotation marks on the beginning and the end. Otherwise, we'll have some errors like this. Unterminated string literal usually means you're missing a quotation mark somewhere. So let's add that back in. Okay, if I run my code, I can type in my name, hit submit. Do you love coding? Oh, I'm not asking anything yet. Okay, cool. Well, let's do this. So var. Now, just like a function, you'll see I've got a, now I wanted to capture a little bit more information about my variable. And so instead of just saying coding or loves, which is not super specific, I wanted it to capture whether or not I love coding, right? So I typed in loves coding, all one word, and I capitalized the first letter of the second word. Now my value for that, I'm going to capture from the user. So I'm going to go to ask. So I'm going to drag over here. Now there's actually a few options. We could just do ask with no placeholder. We could use this placeholder here. So let's just ask without a placeholder. So we'll hit return. And then we'll say, let's print this out. So let's go over to show. I'm going to actually start typing this. Show. And we want to show a string. So we'll pick that one. And just like we did above, I'm going to start with a string here. And then I'm going to add my other string to it. So let's bring up the keyboard again. And let's start out with our variable first. So let's say our variable is loves coding, and then a space, and then I'm going to add these strings together. So I'm going to use the plus sign, and it actually shows up in the autocomplete bar for me. Plus, and then I'm going to use this pre-populated string for me. So now I can say loves coding. Okay, so now we have to give this a bit of thought, because we have to consider what answers the person's going to give here. Are they going to say yes or no? Probably, right? So yes, I do love coding, or no, I do love coding. It's probably not going to work. So let's leave it like that. Now I would want to be a stickler for grammar here. So I'd want to, add that back in. I want to add in a comma here. So let's try running my code. What's my name? Do you love coding? Okay, so we have just a plain input placeholder. Maybe that's why I'd want to use a placeholder, because input maybe doesn't look great. So I'll put yes. Yes, I do love coding. Okay, so that looks good. But then we do want to think of the case where we say, actually, someone's just goofing around with us and they just say blue, I do love coding. Maybe we have to start thinking about, well, our users are going to give us values for our variable. We maybe need to think about how they're going to get used and how they'll show up. So what I'd like you to do for today, if you still got time and you're interested in it, build up some questions, write a little program here where you're quizzing your friends. Maybe ask for their favorite animals, their favorite color, their favorite food, or least favorite color, food, or animal. Maybe they had a bad experience with a koala bear. Write those up. If you want to post them on the discussions board that we have, if you want to post them in the Google Classroom we have that I had a link to earlier, if you want to post them online somewhere, maybe use the hashtag #everyone-can-code. I'd love to see what kind of programs and what kind of quizzes you can write, and share them with your friends. You can also, remember, go to these 3 dots here, and you can take a picture, which will take a picture of this part, the live view of your Swift Playground. You can create a PDF, which will save the coding part, or you can even record a movie of the entire screen while you're doing your coding and running your code. All right, that's it. That's our introduction to variables for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of it. This is a new meaty subject, so be patient and stick with it, and we'll see you tomorrow.